The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the soft hum of conversations in a bustling coffee shop. Professionals tapped away on their laptops, dreamers chatted animatedly, and the world seemed to carry on as usual. But for Daniel Grant, a sharply dressed millionaire with an air of authority, this wasn't just another stop in his perfectly controlled life. As he stepped inside, his eyes scanned the room casually, until they locked onto her. In the far corner, illuminated by the golden light streaming through the window, sat Isabella, his ex-wife. His heart skipped a beat. It had been 2 years since their bitter separation, yet the sight of her stirred memories he had long tried to bury. But then his gaze shifted, and his world tilted. Cradled in her arms was a baby, a tiny boy with dark curls and curious eyes. Daniel froze, his mind racing. Who was this child, and why did something deep inside him feel so familiar? A millionaire's carefully built world is about to be turned upside down. His ex-wife, a baby, and a truth that will change everything. What happens next? You won't believe it. The cozy warmth of the coffee shop seemed to fade as Daniel's eyes locked on Isabella. She sat quietly at a corner table, cradling a baby in her arms, the sunlight catching the soft waves of her chestnut hair. For a moment, Daniel stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The baby, a boy, no older than a year, had dark curls and chubby cheeks that mirrored his own baby pictures. The resemblance was undeniable, a connection Daniel felt deep in his chest, even if his mind refused to believe it. Isabella, sensing his presence, turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting his. Her eyes widened, a flash of recognition crossing her face, followed by something else, a mix of surprise and fear. Her arms instinctively tightened around the baby as if shielding him from the man standing just a few feet away. Daniel's feet moved before his brain could catch up, carrying him toward her. The clinking of coffee cups and the murmur of conversations blurred into the background as he approached. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath shallow. He didn't even realize he was standing right in front of her until he spoke. Is he? Daniel's voice faltered, his throat dry. He swallowed hard and tried again, his eyes fixed on the child. Is he, my son? Isabella's expression hardened, her guard shooting up. She looked down at the baby, brushing a hand gently over his dark curls, avoiding Daniel's piercing gaze. The tension was electric, and in that moment, Daniel knew the answer wouldn't come easily. Her silence spoke louder than words, leaving him standing there, desperate for the truth. The quiet park offered a stark contrast to the bustling coffee shop they had just left. Tall trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the laughter of children playing in the distance filled the air. But for Daniel and Isabella, sitting tensely on a weathered bench under the shade of an old oak tree, the peaceful surroundings did little to ease the storm brewing between them. Isabella adjusted the baby in her arms, her movements deliberate, her gaze fixed on the tiny curls atop his head. Daniel sat stiffly beside her, his hands clasped tightly, his mind racing with unspoken questions. The baby, his resemblance, everything about him screamed the truth Daniel was desperate to hear. What's his name? Daniel finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Isabella hesitated for a moment, then sighed. Liam, she said softly. His name is Liam. Daniel's breath hitched as he stared at the boy. He already knew the answer, but he needed to hear it from her. Is he mine? He asked, his voice trembling. Isabella's jaw tightened, her protective instincts flaring. For a long moment, she didn't reply, as if weighing the consequences of her next words. Finally, she looked up, meeting his gaze with a mixture of resolve and vulnerability. Yes, she said, her voice firm yet trembling slightly. He's your son. The weight of her words hit Daniel like a tidal wave. His heart pounded, guilt surging through him as memories of their past came rushing back, their bitter fights, his selfish choices, the way he had walked away without a second glance. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice thick with regret. Isabella's expression hardened. Because you left, Daniel. You made it clear that I wasn't enough, That we weren't enough. I wasn't going to beg you to stay. And I wasn't going to force you to be a father to a child you didn't know existed. Her words stung, each one a sharp reminder of the pain he had caused. Daniel's shoulders slumped as he ran a hand through his hair, struggling to find the right words. I made mistakes, he admitted, his voice raw. I was blind, selfish. I thought I was doing what was best at the time, but I was wrong. So wrong. If I had known about Liam, you would have what? Isabella cut him off, her tone sharp. Changed overnight, become the man I needed you to be back then. Don't lie to yourself, Daniel. He flinched but didn't argue. She was right, back then, he hadn't been ready. But now, staring at the child he never knew existed, something inside him shifted. I know I can't change the past, he said, his voice steadying. But I want to be here now. For him, for you, if you'll let me. Please, Isabella. Let me prove that I've changed. Isabella's grip on Liam tightened as she studied Daniel's face, searching for any hint of insincerity. Her walls, built so carefully over the years, refused to crumble so easily. You can't just walk back into our lives and expect everything to fall into place, she said firmly. Trust isn't given, Daniel. It's earned. If you want to be in Liam's life, you'll have to show me you're serious. Consistently, Daniel nodded, his expression resolute. I'll do whatever it takes, he said, his voice filled with determination. I'm not walking away this time. I promise. For a moment, the tension hung heavy between them, the weight of their shared history palpable. But as Isabella looked down at Liam, who had fallen asleep in her arms, she allowed herself a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, Daniel could keep his promise. Daniel's journey toward redemption began not with grand declarations but with the quiet, consistent gestures that spoke louder than words. A delivery of diapers and formula appeared at Isabella's doorstep one evening, with a simple note, for Liam. Let me know if there's anything else he needs. Texts followed, thoughtful and unintrusive, checking on Liam's health, asking about his milestones, and offering to help wherever he could. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Isabella watched from the sidelines, her emotions in turmoil. Each gesture chipped away at the anger and resentment she had carried for years, yet her guard remained firmly in place. Was Daniel's change genuine, or just a fleeting attempt at redemption? She couldn't ignore the memories of his past indifference, the wounds he had left behind. But then, there was Liam, whose bright, innocent smile made her question everything. One evening, as she confided in her best friend Sophie over tea, Isabella let her doubts spill out. I don't know if I can trust him, she admitted, her voice heavy with uncertainty. He says he's changed, but how can I believe that after everything? Sophie leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. I get it, Isa. You've been through so much. But think about Liam. He's already bonding with Daniel, and whether we like it or not, Daniel is his father. Maybe, just maybe, he deserves a chance to prove himself. Isabella sighed, her fingers tightening around her cup. I just don't want Liam to get hurt. He deserves stability, not broken promises. Then let Daniel show you he can provide that, Sophie said gently. Take it slow, but don't shut him out completely. You might be surprised. A few days later, Daniel asked if he could spend the day with Liam, just the two of them. Isabella hesitated but eventually agreed, setting firm boundaries. Have him back by dinner, she said, her voice firm but wavering slightly. Daniel nodded, a mix of excitement and nervousness in his expression. The day turned into a whirlwind of joy for both father and son. Daniel took Liam to the zoo, watching with wonder as his son marveled at the giraffes and giggled at the antics of playful monkeys. They shared a messy lunch of chicken nuggets and fries, and later, Daniel guided Liam's tiny hands through an art studio workshop, their clay sculpture of a lopsided turtle earning squeals of delight. By the time they reached the park for kite flying, Liam's laughter echoed through the air as the vibrant kite soared high above. As they packed up to head home, Liam, sleepy from the day's excitement, reached for Daniel and rested his head on his shoulder. Daddy, he murmured, his small voice barely audible but filled with warmth. Daniel froze, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and emotion. It was the first time Liam had called him that, and it felt like a moment he'd been waiting for his entire life. When Daniel returned Liam to Isabella's apartment, she immediately noticed the glow of happiness on her son's face. Liam ran to her, clutching the stuffed toy turtle they had made together. "Look, Mommy, Daddy and I made this," he exclaimed, his excitement contagious. Isabella's gaze shifted to Daniel, her expression softening. "You really made his day," she said quietly, her walls beginning to crack. For the first time in years, she saw a man who wasn't just trying to make amends, but who was genuinely learning how to be the father Liam deserved. The weekend retreat at the ranch felt like stepping into another world, one untouched by the chaos of daily life. Rolling hills stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with grazing horses and cozy cabins that seemed to promise peace and simplicity. Daniel had planned everything, carefully curating the experience to make it special for both Isabella and Liam. As they arrived, Liam's eyes lit up, his tiny hands clapping with excitement at the sight of the animals. "Look, Mommy, a horse," Liam squealed, tugging at Isabella's hand. She smiled at his enthusiasm, but her gaze shifted to Daniel, who was watching them with a hopeful expression. It had been years since she had seen this side of him, a man who wasn't consumed by business but present in the moment, trying to reconnect with the family he had once lost. The weekend unfolded like a series of quiet miracles. Pony rides were first, with Liam giggling uncontrollably as Daniel walked alongside the gentle pony named Daisy, holding him steady. In the evenings, they gathered by the campfire, the flickering flames casting a warm glow on their faces. Daniel roasted marshmallows with Liam, teaching him how to make the perfect s'more. Isabella found herself laughing despite herself as the sticky marshmallow ended up more on Liam's face than in his mouth. But the moments that lingered most were the quiet ones. On the second evening, after Liam had fallen asleep in the cabin, Isabella stepped outside to find Daniel sitting on the porch, gazing up at the stars. A blanket was draped over his shoulders, and he seemed lost in thought. She hesitated, then joined him, wrapping a shawl around herself as she sat down. "It's beautiful out here," she said softly, her voice breaking the comfortable silence. Daniel nodded, his gaze still fixed on the sky. "It is. Makes you realize how small everything else is in comparison, work, money, all the things I used to think mattered most." He turned to her, his expression earnest. "Losing you and Liam. It made me see what really matters. I was so blind, Isabella. I thought success would make me happy, but it didn't. Nothing did, until I saw you two again." His words hung in the crisp night air, raw and vulnerable. Isabella's heart ached at the sincerity in his voice, but the scars of the past weren't so easily forgotten. She looked down at her hands, her fingers curling into the edges of her shawl. "I see how much you've changed, Daniel," she admitted, her voice tinged with hesitation. "But trust takes time. It's not something you can rebuild overnight." Daniel nodded, his gaze steady. "I understand, and I'll wait as long as it takes, Isabella. I just want you to know, I'm not going anywhere this time." The flicker of hope in Isabella's heart grew a little brighter, though she kept her guard up. As they sat there under the stars, the distance between them didn't feel as insurmountable as it once had. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. But she also knew that the road ahead would be long, and she wasn't ready to let go of her caution just yet. As the sun rose the next morning and they packed their things to head back to the city, Isabella glanced at Daniel helping Liam into the car. The way he interacted with their son, the joy he brought into Liam's life, it was impossible to ignore. And though she wasn't ready to say it aloud, the idea of moving forward together no longer seemed so far out of reach. Daniel's dedication began to show in the little things, the moments that might have gone unnoticed but meant everything to Isabella and Liam. He started arriving early to help with bedtime routines, reading Liam his favorite storybooks and making silly voices that sent the boy into fits of giggles. He attended Liam's preschool events, cheering louder than anyone when Liam proudly showed off his artwork. And every weekend, without fail, he planned special outings, from trips to the park to quiet afternoons building block towers on the living room floor. Isabella watched all of this unfold, her heart caught between lingering doubts and the undeniable warmth that Daniel brought into their lives. Liam's joy was unmistakable, and his bond with Daniel grew stronger by the day. The boy began running to the door the moment Daniel arrived, his squeals of "Daddy's here," filling the apartment with a happiness Isabella hadn't realized she'd missed. Slowly, she found herself letting her guard down, though she reminded herself not to rush. Trust was fragile, and she had learned the hard way that it could be shattered. The true turning point came on Liam's 3rd birthday. Daniel insisted on taking the lead in planning the celebration, and Isabella reluctantly agreed. Together, they transformed the small backyard of her apartment building into a colorful wonderland. Balloons lined the fences, a homemade banner reading, "Happy Birthday Liam," hung above the picnic table, and a bouncy castle stood proudly in one corner. Daniel had even hired a magician to entertain the kids, much to Liam's delight. As the party unfolded, Isabella couldn't help but notice how seamlessly Daniel fit into the picture. He flipped burgers on the grill while chatting with the other parents, all the while keeping a watchful eye on Liam as he darted from one game to the next. When it came time to cut the cake, Daniel stood beside Isabella, helping Liam blow out the candles as everyone cheered. The sight of them together, their son's face glowing with happiness, brought a lump to her throat. Later, as the guests began to leave and the yard quieted down, Isabella found herself sitting at the picnic table while Daniel packed up the decorations. The sunset bathed the space in warm, golden light, and Liam played nearby, engrossed in his new toys. "You did all this for him?" Isabella said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "And for me." Daniel set down the box he was carrying and looked at her, his expression open and sincere. "You both deserve it," he replied. "I missed so much, Isabella. I don't want to miss another moment." Isabella hesitated, her emotions swirling as she met his gaze. "You've changed, Daniel. I see it every day in the way you are with Liam. You've brought so much stability and joy into his life, and into mine." She paused, her voice soft but steady. "Maybe it's time we tried to move forward. Not just as co-parents." Daniel's breath hitched, and a flicker of hope lit up his face. "I'll do whatever it takes, Isabella," he said earnestly. "For Liam, for you, for us." For the first time in years, Isabella allowed herself to believe that their broken pieces could be put back together. Not perfectly, but enough to create something stronger, something real. As they watched Liam play, his laughter filling the quiet evening air, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with possibility and the hope of a brighter future. Rebuilding their relationship was a slow, deliberate process, one built on honesty, patience, and a shared commitment to Liam. Daniel and Isabella began attending counseling together, confronting the pain and mistakes that had once torn them apart. There were tough conversations and moments of vulnerability, but with each step, the walls between them began to crumble. They learned to communicate in ways they never had before, laying the foundation for something stronger and more enduring. At home, the changes were tangible. Quiet evenings spent together became their new normal. Daniel would read bedtime stories to Liam while Isabella prepared snacks for their late-night talks. Laughter echoed through the apartment as they played board games or watched Liam chase bubbles in the yard. The once fractured pieces of their lives were slowly coming together, creating a picture of hope and possibility. For Daniel, the transformation was profound. He no longer measured success in terms of wealth or accolades but in the simple joy of being present for his son and the woman he had loved all along. Watching Liam grow and thrive, his curious questions, his uncontrollable giggles, filled Daniel with a sense of fulfillment he had never known. It was in those moments, the unspoken bond of family, that he found his true purpose. One sunny afternoon, The three of them walked hand in hand through the park. Liam ran ahead, his laughter ringing out as he chased a butterfly across the manicured lawn. Daniel glanced at Isabella, her smile soft and full of warmth, and felt a surge of gratitude. For the second chance they had been given. For the family they were rebuilding. For the love that had endured, even in the face of their darkest moments. As they stood together, watching Liam play beneath the golden rays of the setting sun, it was clear. They had found their way back to each other. Not perfectly, but perfectly enough for them. Life offers second chances, if we're brave enough to take them. If this story touched your heart, like, comment, and subscribe for more tales of hope and redemption.